Hello and welcome to another episode of App Stories. This week's episode is brought to you by HTTPBot. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico and Ticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's another week of many projects, and we got through last week with all of our holiday projects, and I know both of us have been continuing to work on some of those things.
There's already a couple of new things.
Well, I was going to say, we've continued to work on the old things. We've started some new projects, and we can kind of talk about those along the way, probably. But I thought it would be better today to talk a little bit about process and tools, because I know I heard from a couple of people who said, "Oh, what app are you using? How are you doing this? What's your technique for dealing with like Claud Code and things?" Because obviously all this stuff is very new, both to you and me, but it's new to everybody because it's not been around all that long.
And changing quickly.
And changing incredibly rapidly. Even since the last time we recorded, there have been changes to Claud Code, and other aspects of Claude. So, and Codex, of course. So I'm always thinking about Claud Code these days still, Federico, because I haven't taken the Codex plunge really yet, although I'm about to, as kind of a backstop to reviewing some projects that I have in the process. But we can talk about both of those things. But I thought the place to start is to talk to people about the terminal on the Mac, because the thing about the terminal, I will
like it or not, you got to use it.
Yes, I will readily admit that I was scared of the terminal for many years. I mean, in the sense that I didn't know what to do. It was intimidating because it was like, paste this thing in to the terminal and something will happen on your Mac. It was just, Greek to me, as they say. And the thing about Claude, and I want to just start with this and get your take on it, is when you start up Claude, and once you install it, all you have to do is type Claude, and you've got essentially what is the chatbot experience that you would get from the web or from the Mac or iOS app. And what's great about that to me is that if you are inexperienced with the terminal and you haven't really used it before, Claude helps you. It tells you what to put in, or it just does it for you. So it's taken something that for someone who's never used the terminal seems very esoteric and intimidating, and it brings natural language to it, which is one of the primary benefits of chatbots to begin with, is that you can just ask for things and it does it. And that, I think, was like, when I realized that, and you realize it very quickly once you install it, you realize, I don't really have to know all this stuff. I mean, I want to learn it, but you don't have to get started. You can just ask for things and they happen. And I found that really, really helpful when I was getting started.
Yeah, and I think the question that we get asked on a regular basis is, why should I use Claud Code in the terminal versus just using Claude on the web or in the app? And there are lots of technical differences. The first one is that Claud Code started off as this coding agent. Now, people are using it for all kinds of things. People are using Claud Code as a general agent on your computer. But what's fundamentally different so even if the same model, right, is working both in Claud Code and Claude on the web or in the app. So you're using Opus 4.5. The model is the same. What's different is the so-called hardness, like the structure, the overall directions, and for the agent. The same model is given very different types of agentic instructions in Claud Code versus what you get in the main regular chatbot experience on Claude.ai or inside the app. A further sort of complication has arisen in the past week, which is the introduction of Claude Co-work. That is basically Anthropic recognizing that people were using Claude Code for non-coding things, and they have taken the hardness, they have taken the structure of Claude Code, and they're trying to simplify it, and they're trying to give it a UI for non-coding tasks. So they gave Claude Co-work, which is a feature of the Mac app, the main Claude for Mac application. It's a feature that gives it access to the file system, to folders, to documents on your computer, and it can do things for you.
Right, with your permission, of course.
That's the idea, right? You can absolutely use Claude on the web and in the app, and you can say, hey, can you build me a web app to do this? And it's going to do that. It's going to create an artifact for you, but it's a completely different and less powerful experience than doing the same in the terminal. Because in the terminal, Claude realizes, okay, I have a full file system at my disposal. I can create folders. I can create subfolders. I can commit these changes to a GitHub repo. I can fetch contents from the web. I can write my own little Python script and execute that Python script.
I can use all the command line tools at my disposal.
All of them. All of them.
Yes.
And so it's the difference between giving Claude a full computer in the shape of a terminal versus running Claude in a virtual machine,
because which is like a sandboxed environment.
It's a sandbox environment, right? So that's where the difference is. And then there are the technical differences, like Claud Code can create so-called sub-agents. So basically mini versions of little tiny Claudes that are like the little butlers for the main Claude.
Yeah.
And the main Claude says, you go search the web, and you write some Python code, and you search the web for Mac stories and these articles, and then you all come back to me, and I'm going to orchestrate all of you. That's exclusive to Claud Code.
Right.
So that's the main difference.
And it can burn through a lot of tokens really fast because you've essentially got 4 or 5 versions of Claude all working in parallel. And another thing that's different, which I think is kind of interesting, is that Claude Code does not have memory in between sessions. The memory is just within the session itself.
Yes.
So, of course you run into the problem too of, if you go for a really long session, Claude starts to get dumber as it goes, although that is mitigated by the compacting. That what they do is effectively, after a certain amount of tokens are used, it takes your conversation, it wipes out most of it, summarizes for Claude the kind of the actionable items and where you happen to be in your process, and then sort of restarts itself with that information. And that works, I think, actually pretty well. But this is very much unlike the chatbot when you're on the web or in the app, where it might remember something, Federico asked it to do 6 months ago, because it has kind of an open-ended memory system. Whereas what you end up having to do when you're in Claude Code in the terminal, like a lot of times what I'll do is I'll kind of get to the end of the day. I'm like, I'm done with this for now. But I'm not finished with Claude, so I will have Claude create an action plan for the next day and say, create a markdown file that says, exactly where you are in this project and remembers where we are, what's going on, what the next plan is, and put it somewhere safe, and I'll pick up the next day. And that's how I do it. I'll go pick up the next day, and it's got a several page plan for the next day.
Yeah, and there are people trying to automate all of these things in Claude Code because it doesn't have a memory system. I just saw this morning somebody who made a skill to basically tell Claude Code to teach itself new skills as soon as it discovers new information and patterns and habits from the user.
Interesting.
So it's basically becoming this self-learning and self-improving thing. And look, this stuff is very much on the bleeding edge of AI right now, and it gets complicated really quickly. When you consider all of these features, skills, plugins, MCP,
commands,
hooks,
you can make your own
which I have never used. Commands.
Oh, I have.
Oh, you use hooks? I've never used hooks.
No, I haven't either.
Like all of these things, I guess there are two strategies. I know some really prolific developers who are using coding agents with none of this fancy custom stuff. They just chat with Claude Code or with OpenAI Codex, and they just have conversations, and they just prompt the agent, and they create things. And then there are also prolific people who have these complex structures with plugins, skills, MCP, custom instruction documents, and they have created this very complex scaffolding around the agent that works well for them. And I guess personally, I am somewhere in the middle, as I'm going to talk about in a minute. But again, this is changing so rapidly. Ultimately, we're all just trying to figure out this stuff as we go. And there is no perfect or ideal solution right now. There is just the way that works for you. There are some guiding principles that I think we can all agree upon, but there is there's no gatekeeping. Nobody can tell you, no, you should be doing things this way, because it's not true, because nobody
can't tell you
knows.
You're holding it wrong. I mean, there's really no right or wrong, and it's a very flexible system, and whatever makes sense with you, the way you work and your workflow, I think is really absolutely fine, because I know Federico and I are doing it in some places similarly, but also in other places very differently. Yeah. And I think that's totally fine, because it each works for each one of us.
Yeah.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by HTTPBot, the all-in-one HTTP and REST client for Apple platforms. Send HTTP requests, connect to WebSockets, inspect JSON, HTML, and XML, and debug APIs on the go with HTTPBot. It runs on iOS, iPadOS, and macOS with seamless CloudKit sync. Plus, the recent update means it looks great on iOS 26 and supports Liquid Glass. HTTPBot is great for working with REST APIs. Import OpenAPI Swagger specs to get requests along with documentation instantly. If you used Postman, bring in and sync collections and environments via the Postman API sync. Or if you just need to import a single request, that works too. Just paste a curl command and get started. You also get native GraphQL support, detailed request metrics like duration and SSL info, plus secure auth via Basic, Digest, OAuth, JWT, and more. With native shortcut support, you can also integrate into your automation workflows, so you can trigger requests from a shortcut, pass a variable like tokens or IDs, filter the responses, and feed and extract fields you need into your next request action using JSON path and XPath. HTTPBot is a universal app for iOS, iPadOS, and macOS with CloudKit sync, so your data is always in step across all of your devices. Download HTTPBot for free and start a risk-free 7-day trial. App Stories listeners can get 25% off an annual subscription. Just visit httpbot.io/appstories or use the code AppStories at checkout. That great deal, 25% off an annual subscription, is available at httpbot.io/appstories and the code AppStories. Our thanks to HTTPBot for their support of App Stories.
So can I start by talking about my setup?
Yeah, tell me your setup, because I want to talk to you. I really want to get into the process in particular, but go ahead and you get started.
Okay, so I run both Claude and Codex on my M4 Mac Mini server. This is a Mac Mini that I set up with Tailscale, so I can access this Mac Mini with either a Jump desktop, which is like a VNC client. It's not based on VNC; it's based on RDP, which is a higher image quality protocol.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's basically accessing it via a VNC-like protocol, or I can access the Mac Mini via SSH to have a terminal. I use this application called Termius on my iPhone, iPad, on another Mac, like my Mac Studio or my MacBook Pro, to start up Claude or Codex on my Mac Mini. Now, the trick here is that I am using a so-called terminal multiplexer. It's called TMUX. That's TMUX.
Same
and
here.
I'm going to try and simplify this. It's a way for you to keep a terminal session active and accessible from multiple devices. If I go to my Mac Mini in the living room right now, and I unlock it, and I manually open the Apple Terminal app on the Mac Mini, that terminal session, that terminal window, it's going to be exclusively running on my Mac Mini.
Right.
I cannot pick up my phone and access that terminal window because it's a window running on that particular machine. With Tmux, I can access a session that is not bound to a window, to a macOS window. It's a virtual terminal session that I can access with a little command from my iPhone, from my iPad, from any device. It's basically syncing this session, and you can access it from anywhere.
Right.
So
it's not tied to a window, but it is tied to the Mac Mini.
It's tied to the Mac Mini, but it's not tied to a window with the traffic light controls.
Right.
And all of these modern terminal apps, John uses a different one. I like Termios because I can also run it on Android, for example. They all tend to have these days built-in support for, obviously, SSH authentication, but also Tmux or some other terminal multiplexer. Tmux is the most popular one. There are other similar systems. I just like this one because it's very popular and widely documented.
Yeah, and it's pretty reliable in my experience. Yeah. I want to stop you there just for a second because I want to explain, I think, why, like, and you're probably, maybe you're the same way, but the reason I'm using both Jump Desktop and something, I'm using Secure Shellfish with Tmux, the reason I'm using both is that sometimes I need access to other things on the Mac, right?
Or authorize a permission dialog, for example.
That too. But like for me, I talked in AppStories Plus last week about a web extension that I'm making for Safari, and sometimes I need access to Safari itself on that machine, or I need access to Xcode, or I need access to some other app besides being in the terminal. So that's why sometimes it's just easier to have something like Jump Desktop going, which I will say is very good, but it also uses battery like crazy. Like if I'm on my laptop, I almost always just have it plugged in because it gets very hot because it's running at a very high frame rate, running that Mac Studio in the other room.
Yeah. Then I guess the other question would be, if you're listening to this, like why both Claud Code and Codex?
Yeah.
So I followed the advice of Peter Steinberger. I pronounced their last name wrong on Unwind last week, and I apologize. The creator of many open source projects, including CloudBot, which by the time this episode comes out, I should have an article on Mac Stories about it. And I have realized this. I like Claud Code for the initial planning phase of any project. I prefer Claude's way of talking to you. I prefer Claude's virtual taste for design. I think Claude designs interfaces that are more aesthetically pleasing. And I really like the ecosystem around Claud Code and sort of the way that it deals with sub-agents, like all of this, the way that the core agentic feature of it works, I prefer it. However, for heavy coding tasks, refactors, figuring out a bug fix, like when you really need to have a beast of a machine that plows through thousands and thousands of lines of code, nothing for my taste beats a Codex. With with Codex 5.2, the model set to extra high thinking level. Mm-hmm. That thing is a beast, and it's being able to figure out, like initially let's say I have an idea, right? Like last night, I had an idea for a little web app running on my Mac Mini to let me easily browse the logs of all of my Claud Code and Codex sessions. All of your sessions, turns out, are saved locally on your computer with JSON files. Now, those JSON files are unreadable if you try and just open them. First of all, you got to find them in the Finder.
And they're like deeply nested within a JSON structure.
And they have IDs, and they have tons of information in plain text baked into these files. They are unreadable by humans. And so I created an initial plan with Claud Code, and I said, hey, I want to build this based on a project by Simon Willison, but I kind of want to take it in a different direction. Claude created the initial plan, worked for 30 minutes, and created something workable. There's a little server that runs on my Mac Mini, scans this subfolder for new sessions, keeps track of them, adds them to a database, and then presents them in a web app running on localhost that I can open from Google Chrome or from Safari And it's since my Mac Mini is on Tailscale, it's accessible from everywhere.
Right.
But there were some problems, and so I took that code base and I opened Codex and I described my issue and I set the thing into extra high, and 14 million tokens later, it was perfect. And I now have this web app that I posted in the MacStories Discord to browse my entire archive of Claud Code sessions and Codex sessions. They display Markdown. They break down my messages versus the assistant messages nicely. There's a colorful liquid glass UI for them. It counts the token usage for each session, that kind of stuff. So that's why I have the dual approach.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that I've been doing, which isn't like exactly a dual approach with Codex, but I've found that when Claude gets really stuck on a problem, one thing Claude's not very good about is knowing when to look for help, knowing when to research. And so I've gotten to the point where I have a good feel for, okay, I've tried to get this thing fixed 3 or 4 times by describing it. I'm not getting anywhere.
And it's just spinning its wheels. Yeah,
it's spinning its wheels. I rerun my app and it's doing the exact same thing it did the last 3 times. I tell Claude, I said, look, you need to research this, and I'm going to do some research too. So describe this problem in detail for me in a query form. And then I take that, copy it, put it in my deep research project, which I explained 2 episodes ago. Let parallel AI grind at that problem for 30 or 40 minutes. Meanwhile, Claude's doing its own research, which doesn't take nearly as long because I was just using general web search. And sometimes it comes up with the answer after doing its research. Sometimes it's just a really hard problem that really requires digging through Reddit and Apple developer forums and all that kind of thing. Sometimes the parallel AI comes back with a 3,000 word essay on all the problems and all the parameters of it. I just dump it into Claude, it churns away, and it'll eventually figure it out. That's actually worked out really well for me over time.
Yeah. That said, I mentioned that I don't have a complex setup for this, but I have some tips that I want to share.
Okay.
First of all, the entire AI industry, with the exception of Anthropic, have standardized around formatting. So let's say that you want to give your coding agent custom instructions to remember on every session. Preferences, like my name is Federico, I like working on iOS, I typically want you to build web apps with HTML and CSS, no React, like preferences for projects that you want to create. And you don't want to repeat yourself over and over, right? With those instructions. Right. The industry has standardized on this file, this markdown document that you can put in any folder. And as long as it's called agents.md, your coding agent is going to read it and it's going to remember all of your instructions. And there's a website, agents.md, that you can go to read about this standard.
Here's a question for you, and I actually don't know the answer to this. Is that the same as Claude.md?
I was going to get to this.
Okay.
Anthropic is the only company that has not adopted agents.md.
Okay.
Anthropic with Claud Code, Claude needs to see a document. It's the same idea, same implementation, but the document needs to be titled Claude.md.
Got it. And you can do a global one, and you can do like a project level.
You can do a global one. So that's what I did. I did a global one, and I put it in my user folder. Mm-hmm. And you can do per project scoped ones. Right. So you can have, for example, I have a global one with I use Notion, my daily note is in this format, but then I have a per project one. So that, for example, for my HTML web apps project, I have instructions for that specific project so that the agents remember my preferences over time. However, I didn't really want to duplicate my instructions over and over between 2 markdown documents, especially when you compound that for global preferences and folder preferences. Mm-hmm. So they become 2, 4, 6. How many markdown documents should I keep track of? Well, Anthropic realized that people were really upset about this, and they rolled out support for symlinking your agent's document inside Claude Code, inside Claude MD. So right now, all of my Claude.md documents just say one thing inside of them, and that's at agents.md.
I see. So is that just for the global one, though, or is that for
everyone? As long as you refer to agents.md inside Claude.md.
But is it just one agents.md file, I guess, both for your global and for your project level stuff? Or do you have multiple
So let's say
files?
that we're working with my home directory, like /vticci, versus we're working with /projects/html.
Right.
When I start Claud Code or Codex in my home folder, they're going to read the document at /vticci. Right? And Claude is going to see, oh, I see there's Claude.md. It's going to open Claude.md. It's going to see, oh, it says at agents.md. Let me go read agents.md. And it's going to stop there. And similarly, in my HTML folder, I have another agents.md document. I have another Claude.md document, and it's going to resolve that. So you basically just need to keep track. You basically just need to write your instructions in agents.md and reference that document in Claude.md.
See, I haven't done any of that because I've mostly been working in Claude so far.
Okay, yeah. If you dual
it's good to know, though.
Agents, this is useful information to have. Similarly, I need to keep track of skills in two separate locations. There's Codex/skills and there's Claude/skills. Unfortunately, here there's no good system in place to reference the skill of one another. So I just manually copy and paste skill folders between those two locations. I should maybe set up a system with Hazel or shortcuts to duplicate skills.
You could do it through GitHub too. I've got my skills backed up to GitHub, and maybe you could do it and pull them down then.
I haven't yet, but maybe I should.
I haven't. I mean, yeah.
Honestly, the most annoying part of this system is keeping track of MCP integrations. Because you gotta redo the connections and the authentications and the logins.
Yeah, it's terrible because you have to do it both for the app itself and then Claud Code in the terminal. You have to do it separately. I'm kind of the same way. I'm like, I forget which ones I have. I mean, obviously you can pull up a list, but I totally forget which ones are active and which ones aren't.
Yeah. More tips. I frequently use Codex in YOLO mode, which is basically bypass all permission dialogues and just let it rip. Claude has a similar flag in the terminal, but it's called dangerously skip permissions.
Yes.
And so as long as you type those, I set them up as a little keyboard snippets so that I can just type YOLO and it expands into Codex YOLO or CCC.
That I do not do.
And it expands into Claude skip permissions.
I'm working on my production machine, my Mac Studio. You're working on a separate Mac Mini. That's the big difference there.
That's why.
And if I move over to the Mini, I might be willing to do that, but not on my production machine.
I always run tests for anything that I build. And by running tests, I mean, usually I'm building web tools, web-based tools. Turns out these agents, they can not only write the code or check documentation or, refactor code, they can also test the code by using a web browser. There are different ways to do this. My favorite ones are a plugin called Playwright.
Yep,
I think Playwright was created by Microsoft, if I'm not mistaken. And it basically spins up a virtual instance of Google Chrome. You can literally watch your computer and you will see a Google Chrome window pop up. Yep. And it's like an isolated Google Chrome session. It's going to open the web app that you created and it's going to test it. And it has commands to virtually click on the web page, resize the window, scroll, test the mobile layout, test dark mode, test accessibility stuff. You can do all that. And it's going to feed back those screenshots because it's basically taking screenshots to the agent, and the agent's going to say, oh, I see that the button is actually broken. Let me fix it. Or you can use Claude in Chrome. This is a new feature. It requires the Claude extension for Google Chrome, and this integration is exclusive to Claud Code. Claud Code can talk to the Chrome extension made by Anthropic. But it's a similar idea. It's going to open up Google Chrome, ask for permissions initially, and then it's just going to virtually interact with the web browser.
Right.
And finally, let's see, what else can I share? Oh, yes. I created enough tools that I realized I wanted to make them consistent. I wanted all to kind of look the same and share some common guidelines. So I fed Codex, because again, Codex thinks a lot up front. And it loves to consume tokens and search the web and research and research and research. So I gave it dozens of URLs, MacStories links, screenshots, PDF documents about iOS 26 and Liquid Glass. And I said, come up with a web equivalent of the Liquid Glass design language that we can consistently apply to all the tools we're working on. Come up with a design guide markdown file. That's going to be our aesthetic principles for all of the tools we're going to create going forward. And make sure that everything we do is based on these guidelines. But for each tool, make it unique. Different color, different icons, but the same overall conventions. And it's been great, because now you can tell that all of my tools are based on a common baseline, but they're all different enough from one another. And that's, I think it's been great to organize all my projects in folders, give them these consistent instructions, give them Google Chrome for virtual testing, and then just, let it rip and iterate.
Yeah, I got to check out the Chrome extension. I haven't used that yet either. So let me drop a few tips and tricks and some advice on how to get started with this stuff. I've been using primarily up until now my Mac Studio, and that's probably going to change just because I've been doing so much stuff. I don't want to do something that gets crosswise with my main Mac, and I'll probably move it over to a Mac Mini. However, that's what I've been doing. And I think it does pay to kind of do most of the development work on one machine and then get into that machine via SSH or tmux sessions or something like, Jump Desktop or Screens or whatever you use, because then everything's in one place. One thing I did early on is I was building some things at my desk on my Mac Studio. I was building other things on my laptop while sitting on the couch. And then they would get out, even with using, GitHub repos and stuff, I would forget what was where, and I would have different conversations with Claude going on in different places that had no awareness of each other. And it just got messy very fast. So I think it does pay to kind of do everything in one place. I'm also using a GitHub project called Claude Usage Tracker, which puts statistics in your menu bar about how much of your token allotment you've used. It has a bunch of other statistics, but the two that I use are your weekly allotment and your session allotment. So as you approach 100%, so and it's all in percentages, which is, I kind of wish it was by the day, because with the way Claude rolls over weekly, that's 14% a day. 14% times 7 is 100. So I'm always doing mental math about, I'm on day 4. 4 times 14, not obviously the easiest thing to do off the top of your head. But, it gives me an idea of where I happen to stand. If I'm ahead, I'm behind, that kind of thing, which is useful when you're using up a lot of tokens. And they do a nice job with the UI. It's pretty simple, but you can get a good sense of where you happen to stand. In terms of the actual process of creating these tools, I think it's funny, I guess, you mentioned how Claude's really good at web UI, and I think it is too. It did a really good job on my research tool. It's really not very good at native UI, at least not Swift UI. And that's probably where it struggled the most for me. The thing there, I think, that's key, if you're using native UI, you're maybe building an iOS app or something, and you want to get you want it to have a sense for what should be done. First of all, in your Claude.md file, reference the HIG. Reference all the Apple developer website, the core stuff, the core resources that you would use as a developer to make these apps, because then it will know the first thing it should do before it goes out and checks a bunch of blogs or Reddit posts is look at the Apple documentation and see what kind of the conventions are today, and make sure it knows about Liquid Glass, which is also in the HIG. So that's a good thing to do. And when it gets stuck, feeding it screenshots helps an awful lot. One thing that I wish that these tools did, and Claude doesn't do it, maybe Codex does, I don't know, but some UX and UI things are better shown in a short video than they are with screenshots, and Claude can't take video. And I wish I could take a 2 or 3 second video and upload that to show how, an animation isn't right, or this button is doing the wrong thing. Instead, you do a series of screenshots and have to describe it in detail, which can get tedious at times. But what I always start a project with, which is Claude's planning mode, and I oftentimes tell it to think extra hard. Ultra hard is
think.
Ultra think is the big thing, right?
Ultra think is literally a keyword that you can type in the terminal, and it's gonna get like a fancy multicolor effect when you do that.
Yes, and it's going to chew up tokens pretty fast, but I think it does help to have a very good plan going in, because all these bots, it really is a case of garbage in, garbage out. If you just say, make me a web app that tracks my read later stuff, who knows what you're going to get? You need to really describe exactly what the app does and what its core functionality is. And I think it does help to really keep it focused, at least at first, what's the core thing you want to accomplish? And then once that's working, you can build out from there, which is kind of how I've been doing a lot of these things. Because usually the first run at something like this, especially if you're doing some sort of native app, it's not going to be very good. It's going to be, the UI is going to be okay, but you're going to look at it and you're going to say, well, that's not how it's done on the iPad. And you'll have to kind of walk it through how to do a traditional side panel and whatever. But it does pay to do a lot of planning up front, and then take your plan. And then one thing that I do, both with code, design, and just plans, those 3 categories in particular, is I tell Claude, I said, okay, dispatch 2 subagents. Tell them that they are in competition to be the lead developer at MacStories, is usually what I say. And you're going to decide who we should hire. And they need to focus on, all these things. And I have all the things that I think are priorities. And I tell them, and they'll be penalized for things that are not substantial issues or problems, that kind of thing. And they'll run in the background, they'll come back, and then Claude will tell me which did a better job. And then I'll say, well, you know what? Do that plan and take these couple of other things that the other one came up with that are pretty good, do a consolidated plan, and then implement that. Because what that'll do is, I think a lot of times with code review with these agents, is they come up with a lot of things that are non-issues. They are maybe like issues that aren't in practice real issues. And so there's things that they might want to do that could break things that you really don't want them to do. So it's important to kind of figure out what are the things that are really breaking bugs and things that are going to affect how your code runs, and what are things that are maybe can just be skipped or worried about later. So I use that a lot, and for design, it works to do that as well, I think, because you can send these subagents out to look at the HIG, to look at some websites, and it'll come back with recommendations. I guess my final thing would be just some advice on start small. I think it really helps, don't tackle like a Mac app or an iOS app out of the box. One of the first things I did was I was creating pop clip extensions, because pop clip extensions are just simple JavaScript in a YAML format, which is just like a key value system that things like Obsidian uses for its metadata. And so they tend to be, and because what you're doing is you're manipulating text, they tend to be fairly simple, and you can just describe what you want, and you can feed it the pop clip documentation, which is on the website for the app, and it'll come up with some scripts for you. And those are like really good short-term easy wins. Like I had one what I described in Club Mac Stories, where I was having a problem with sometimes copying links out of Notion and other places, that when I pasted them into a text editor, I would get the URL in Markdown format. So it'd be the link would be the URL, and then it would be linked to the URL. So it'd be URL in square brackets, URL in regular parentheses, and that was driving me crazy. So I asked it to create a pop clip extension that just stripped all that away. And so it's just the plain text URL. And that took like a few seconds. And that's the kind of thing that I think you can both do and have something that's useful to you right away. And because the code tends to be just maybe a dozen or 24 lines, you can also ask Claude to explain it to you if you want to start learning how JavaScript works, which I think these tools are good as learning tools in that sense too. And I've done a fair amount of that as well. And then once you get you're kind of comfortable with how the tools work, that's when you kind of move on to, some Python scripts you can run in the terminal or via, launchd events that are fired off on certain times of the day. And then once you've got that under your belt, then you maybe should start thinking about web apps or native apps and that kind of thing. It's just kind of a progression because there's a lot of little things and aspects of this that you kind of need to learn as you go. And if you dive in too deep in the deep end, you'll just kind of get frustrated, I think.
Yeah. I think this is all, maybe I'm biased, I think this is all excellent advice. And just before we go and we move on to the plus segment, I just want to reiterate, you don't need to start complex. With these coding agents, if you have an idea, just start prompting the model. Like ignore custom NCPs, custom skills, plugins, hooks. Just start by chatting like it was a chatbot and keep an eye on it. Don't bypass permissions at first. And you will see that it's a familiar experience, but different enough because it's running on your computer. Right. And just play with it. Just play with it. Don't think that you're supposed to be this expert right away. You will become one, but you'll get there progressively over time. And maybe you realize, like me, that there's maybe some level of customization that you want to have, but you don't want to go overly complex with these things. And it's fine because they are powerful enough to get you there and let you create these little projects for you or solve a problem, make a custom app that you and your spouse have always wanted to have to keep track of groceries in a particular way. And it's going to build it for you. So don't start complex.
Yeah. There are a lot of people creating some really crazy structures around these tools that sometimes are just, I think they're too much a lot of times because you can, as Federico said, you can get away with just using Claud Code in the terminal, and it's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And when you don't know something, the best thing about chatbots is they'll give you the answer. It's like, if you don't know if something's possible, like, is it possible to do this in a web app? It'll tell you. And then you'll know, you'll know, I'm not going to waste my time on this because it's really not possible in the way that I want it to work. But if it is, then you can start exploring it further and come up with a plan to actually code it, which I do that all the time. Yeah. All right, Federico, this is a great conversation. In AppStories Plus, we are going to talk about Google, Gemini, and the future of shortcuts, because this has been on my mind for weeks. And it's only been on my mind more since Google and Apple had their joint statement on X of all places, the Everything app, about working together with foundation models. So we're going to talk about that. I want to thank our sponsor too for this episode. That's HTTPBot. You can find out more about them in the show notes. And you can find out more about me and Federico over at macstories.net and Club MacStories. That's club.macstories.net. And of course, we're on social media where Federico is at Ticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.